Wow, just knocked myself in the face with a necklace. That's cool. Hey everyone, it's Jessica. This is a video that I've wanted to make for a while now. I just realized that I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary of my experience with Bell's palsy. I know I've wanted to make this video for a while, mostly because when I was experiencing Bell's palsy, when I was at the start of it especially, all I was doing was going online, was reading blogs about other people's experiences, I was watching videos about other people's experiences, and even back then I knew that I would want to eventually create a video to kind of document my experience, to tell you guys what I've been through, how long it lasted, what I experienced, so you guys can maybe find some comfort in that or some knowledge in that if you've recently been diagnosed with Bell's palsy. I know it's kind of a super weird diagnosis, and you know, you don't meet a lot of people who know a lot about it, so I wanted to share my experience with all of you. So I want to cover 3 different things in this video. 1 is my experience with Bell's palsy. 2 is my experience with the medication they gave me to treat the Bell's palsy, which is Prednisone, a steroid. And 3 is just the overall anxiety and kind of psychological after effects of the Bell's palsy. So first of all, let's talk about the diagnosis and that experience. So I was first diagnosed with Bell's palsy one day last October. I woke up, I felt completely fine, nothing seemed amiss until I was putting on my makeup. When I started to put on my lipstick, it just felt different. Like the feeling of the lipstick on my lips felt different. It was almost like my lips were numb. When I looked in the mirror, I couldn't quite figure out. Like, it was a very subtle change in my face at first, and I know a lot of people have really strong physical reactions right away. Their face, you know, totally droops on one side. Mine was a little bit more subtle, and so I couldn't quite figure out if one side of my face maybe was a little swollen or if one side was just like numb and flat. Like, it was really hard for me to tell what was what with that. I do actually have some photos of the time. I don't have like any videos of that I can recall, but I will put some photos kind of my progress throughout this video so you guys can see what that looked like and how it healed, kind of what that journey was. But at first it was just a really subtle, it almost looked like half my face was swollen rather than half my face was limp. And I had no idea really what it was or what that would be. I thought maybe it was an allergic reaction to something, so I did what any 20-something would do, and I talked to my mom about it, and I was trying to explain to her what it was, and she told me later that based on my description of like, oh, half my face kind of feels like maybe it's numb, she actually thought that I might have had a stroke, which she failed to share with me, probably because she knew it would totally freak me out. So I didn't go to the doctor right away. I thought, you know what, maybe this is an allergic reaction, so I took the morning off of work, and I took Benadryl, and I decided to just go like sleep it off if I could. When I woke up from that nap, it wasn't better. If anything, the like puffiness that I was seeing, which in reality was one side of my face was drooping, one side of my face was normal, but that normal side looked puffy. So that perceived puffiness, if anything, was a little bit worse. I noticed when I tried to like do the kissy face with my lips, it was like, it looked like it was going off to one side. Like, I couldn't make it go straight. And that's because this side of my mouth was drooping, it was numb, it was paralyzed. But to me it just looked like my lips were going off to one side, puffy and weird. So I was looking around my mouth, I was trying to figure out what was going on, and I noticed inside my mouth I had this little like dark red mark, like very small, but I thought it might be a spider bite. I live in Oklahoma, and we do have brown recluse and black widow spiders. I've actually seen them in my house before, and so I thought, oh my gosh, this is like a poisonous spider bite. I'm gonna go to urgent care, and I'm really glad I did, but I had no idea what I was actually in store for. So I get to urgent care, and the first person that looks at me is actually a medical student. And she keeps asking me if I have any allergies. She keeps asking me, like, are you sure you're not allergic to shellfish? I'm like, not that I know of, and also I haven't eaten shellfish since I was like 12. I don't like it, so it's probably not a reaction to that. The doctor came in, he actually noticed something that the medical student didn't notice and I hadn't even noticed, which is one of my eyes was blinking significantly slower than the other eye. What was happening was it actually wasn't even fully closing, and it just had like this delayed blinking effect. I actually maybe might have a video saved of that I took, like lots of videos of that, to see if it had improved. I was always in like selfie mode trying to see if I could tell if my blinking was back to normal throughout this like few weeks that I had it. But so he noticed that, and that freaked me out, but he said, okay, it's Bell's palsy, I'm going to prescribe steroids. It was prednisone. After about 72 hours, you'll probably start to feel better. You'll start to notice a difference. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Weird diagnosis. Haven't really heard of it, but he said, take these pills, you'll be better in a few days. I was like, cool, sounds good, what a weird experience. So then I started taking the steroids, prednisone, and it felt fine that first day. And I can't remember if it was the first night or the second night. I really can't. I wish I could. But it was really soon after taking the prednisone. I was on a really high dose of it. If I find out what dose it was, I'll put it in text here because I can't quite remember. It might have been like 70 milligrams a day or something. It was like 7 10 milligram pills, something like that. I'll put it here if I find the actual dosage. So I was on a pretty high dose of that, and it was either day 1 or day 2 that evening. I just started to feel really depressed. Like I knew that I had a really good prognosis, and I hadn't been concerned about it like all day, and I just started to feel like so down, so bummed out, so like, what if this like doesn't get better? This is so weird. Why is this happening to me? I just felt like blah and gross, and I decided that I would go to bed and just try to sleep off my bad attitude. And it literally like hit me like a brick. Like I was fine, then all of a sudden I was just like slumped over on the couch like, this sucks. It was just this really weird fast mood shift. So I went to bed hoping I'd feel better in the morning. I ended up waking up like midnight. I'd only been asleep for like an hour or so, and I just felt really weird. Like I felt not right. And it's really hard to explain. Just like everything in my body felt off. And I started walking to the bathroom, and I felt like my legs felt like weak and shaky. It was just this really mild but odd feeling. So I decided I'm going to go to the kitchen, I'm going to get myself some water, I'm going to just like relax. I just made it back to my room with the water when I started to shake. My whole body started to shake, and it started to get worse and worse until I was like convulsing, like I was vibrating. I didn't know what was happening. It never happened to me before. I was convinced that I was allergic to the medication they gave me, that I was like overdosing, that I was going to have to go to the hospital and get my stomach pumped. And I was shaking for, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It felt like forever. It was probably only about 10 minutes. And I finally was able to stop. I was full out sobbing while this was happening. I was convinced that I was going to die. I almost went to the hospital. I was so convinced that like I was having a bad reaction to the medication. What I know now is that was a panic attack. I have had some struggles with anxiety in my life. I've even had what I consider panic attacks before, but they felt different than this. This was full out uncontrollable vibrating, which I never experienced before. It's the worst panic attack physically that I've ever experienced, and praise God I've never experienced it since then. Hope I never do. So I made an appointment to see my regular doctor right away because I was completely freaked out, and she told me that apparently it's not uncommon for steroids to have that effect on people, especially people like me who maybe already have heightened levels of anxiety and adrenal gland issues in their system. She basically told me that I had a choice. I could stop taking the prednisone. Of course I could. It was my choice, and that would maybe help stop my panic attacks. But it would also slow down the healing of the Bell's palsy. So I was faced with a really, really difficult situation. My face now, at this point, I was so self-conscious about smiling. My eye wasn't shutting completely, like, ever. I started having to tape it up at night so nothing would happen to it while I slept because it wasn't fully closed. So I can slow that process down, feel better overall, or I can keep taking it and maybe have more violent panic attacks. So I'm like, okay, this is not my favorite situation ever. So she recommended that we just cut the dose. We cut the dose of the prednisone and we go from there. So I'm like, sounds good. I still want the healing effects of it, not so much the panic attacks. Let's cut it in half or whatever it was that she did. So over the next several days to a week, really probably the worst I've ever felt in my life. And I'm not saying that lightly. And it wasn't physical pain or physical distress really, with the exception of the physical results of anxiety. But I was in such a mental fog as a result of the prednisone use. I felt very disconnected from everything. And it's so hard to explain. I want to do it justice, especially if anyone else out there has experienced it, to show that you're not alone, you're not crazy. But I knew that I was doing things, but I didn't feel like I was a part of the things that I was doing. I know that I exist in the world, but this doesn't feel like me or my life. The best example I can give is I had to run to the pharmacy to get eye drops for my eye. I was driving down the street and I'm like, I know that I'm driving this car. Logically, I understand that I'm controlling this car, but I don't feel like I'm here. It was such a bizarre, disconnected feeling. And I felt incredibly depressed, while on the inside, very anxious, very manic, very freaked out, but also just incredibly down in the dumps. It ended up getting to a point, and this is when I decided to cut my steroid use and just say, pray that God speeds the healing of the Bell's palsy because I can't take this anymore. I got to a point where I couldn't take my dog outside at night because I was so freaked out and scared. I was convinced that someone was taking pictures of me. And this is again that disconnection. Logically, I was telling myself, that's ridiculous. That's kind of stupid. You're thinking really silly, weird thoughts. But I felt it. And it's my struggle with anxiety, I think, is the same way, and maybe I'll make another video about this. It's logically, I get that I shouldn't feel those things, but physically I'm feeling them. And I was just so freaked out, and I was convinced that someone was taking photos of me. So I stopped taking prednisone. It took a few days to a week, probably closer to a week actually, maybe even over a week, for me to start to kind of feel a little normal again. As far as the mental fog, it did start to lift. I felt really tired for several weeks after I stopped taking it, but the mental fog did lift several days to a week after I stopped taking it. Thank God. Worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. So that was my experience with the prednisone. My experience with anxiety has been a recurring issue in my life, never to that level, and it did last several months after the incidents with the prednisone. I think the prednisone really brought it to a peak that it had never seen before, especially with those physical symptoms. Usually my anxiety had been more mental, and this really brought out those physical symptoms, which did end up lasting a lot longer even after I'd taken the prednisone. Because I'd had other stressors in my life and other issues with anxiety in my life, I can't say that it was 100% because of the prednisone, but I do know that that brought it up to the forefront in a way it really never had been before. Now, my experience with the Bell's palsy, I actually have a lot more positive things to say about that. Like I said, I'll show some pictures here of kind of my before and after and during of Bell's palsy, so you guys can look at that. Really, when all is said and done, it was gone in about 3 to 4 weeks. And it started to get better before that. It started to get better after about 2 weeks. I do believe that I had a pretty mild case of it. I know that some people have a lot more significant, noticeable changes in their face. Obviously, I noticed it, and you can see it in the pictures. But if I was just looking at you, stone face like that, you probably couldn't tell if you didn't know me. You couldn't really tell unless I smiled. My smile was pretty messed up. The thing that I found the most troubling through it all, the smile I did get really self-conscious of, and that's just natural, it's human nature. The thing that was the most troubling was actually the eye. It was really bizarre, especially when I, you know, started to really notice it with, you know, one eye blinking normally and one eye blinking so slow, and the realization that my eye never totally closed. It did take my eye up at night for about like a week or so. I didn't love the way that felt. It was really hard for me to sleep like that. I had trouble sleeping anyway, but I was really worried about it getting dried out or getting hurt. I had eye drops at all times. It was just kind of a bizarre feeling. I think if it weren't for my experience with the prednisone, I mean, there's a good chance that as long as I took the steroids, it did actually help that healing process, and maybe it would have healed slower if I hadn't taken any of it at all. But if it weren't, like, my experience with the prednisone notwithstanding, my experience with Bell's palsy really wasn't that bad. Like I said, a month in, out of it, it was fine. My face was back to normal. If you're going through it right now, I know it's like super intimidating diagnosis to get. It's super weird. You probably, like me, don't know anyone that's ever had it, and it can be really intimidating. But, you know, it's been a year now. I kind of forget that I even had it, except for that like weird steroid psychosis thing that I'll never forget. The Bell's palsy itself is almost an afterthought to all that drama with the steroids. So if you're going through it right now, give it a few weeks, and hopefully you are like me and it'll fade and it'll just be, you know, a story to tell at parties. If you guys have any questions about Bell's palsy or my experience with the prednisone, drop them in the comments. I'll be sure to check those and respond to any questions you guys might have. I'd be happy to provide any insights that I can. If you are currently going through a Bell's palsy diagnosis, I wish you fast healing, and just breathe and know that it'll be okay.